What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Edric Subur, the founder of Warmspace, and we speak about the opportunity to automate deep conversations between strangers. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy. Edric, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Miriam. Thanks for having me.
I'm very curious to hear more about the story of Warmspace and how to facilitate authentic connections between strangers online. And before we get there, I always enjoy starting with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Yeah, I don't think I normally call myself facilitator when someone asks me, hey, what do you do? But reflecting on this question, I did see myself taking the facilitator role many times. I like to host circles for my friends. I ran some workshops back at my times at Google. And in my current venture at Warmspace, I also facilitated like a team circle, practicing what we preach, focusing on authentic human connection within the team, and also running a couple of workshops for our Warmspace community. So I think I'm starting to call my facilitator starting this from this podcast.
Hey.
Yeah.
How would you usually call yourself? What's the label you put on your forehead?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting, right? Because I think we all are more than just like a label or two. There's just so many labels. But my go-to labels are entrepreneur, a startup guy, mindfulness geek, recently podcaster.
Yay.
I am always collecting new labels that I can attach to my LinkedIn profile. Yeah, it's so hard to just kind of reduce your identity to just one thing.
Yeah, and I must say that I actually like to see facilitation more as a life skill. As you said, you host and facilitate circle conversations with your friends or your team, and even your family. I think we can facilitate conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I just recently got another call discussing about skills that will be in demand in the future. And facilitation came up as one of them. Initially, we thought of leadership, and then we thought, in the future, things will be more decentralized and we need more people from the local community knowing how to organize themselves. And that includes bringing people together, facilitating discussion, facilitating conversation. So I think facilitation is not something that you just do professionally, but what we all need to learn how to do in our own lives and with the people around us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And sometimes to me, it feels as if facilitation is the presentation skill of the 80s. So in the 80s, every manager and leader signed up for presentation skills and how to use PowerPoint effectively. And I think today, these managers and leaders actually, want to learn how to facilitate conversations.
I like that analogy. It's like the evolution of presentation.
Yes.
Because presentation is just like one way, but facilitation includes engagement. And that's where things come alive.
Exactly. Inviting all the voices and brains and hearts that are already there into the room.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then especially if things are going virtual now and people's attention span is getting smaller without that in-person kind of presence, the more people need to think about how to facilitate instead of how to present.
Yeah. Yeah, and the attention span is actually a good one. And maybe even the bridge then to Warmspace. So to have longer, deeper conversations, something I think that became quite rare. So I would first be curious to just hear the story behind Warmspace, and maybe you can explain to the audience what it actually is.
Yes, so let me start with sharing what it is to set some context. So it's a social platform that facilitates deep human connection through guided conversation. So if you could think of Headspace, Insight Timer, Calm, like guided meditation apps, we're similar, but for conversations. It's almost as if having a facilitator sitting in your conversation without having a real facilitator either. But you feel that you're held and you're safe and you're guided to go deep and share vulnerability with someone that you could be connecting from across the globe. So the mission is to allow everyone to feel seen and heard at any time. And that this is the vision that I have for everyone to never ever feel that they don't belong in this planet, because I was in that place for a while and it really sucks to think that you're alone. And we tend to forget that we are so much more similar as fellow humans than the differences that we have. And the problem today is with social media, fake news, and all the divisions happening today. We like to pick a little bit of an information from social media, how great their lifestyle is, or how they're not sharing the same political opinion with us, and then use that little piece of information to reduce the personality or persona of somebody, while there's so much humanity that is hidden or lying underneath those surface level information that we're not relating with. So the goal and mission of Warmspace is to be able to scrap all of this noise from on the surface so people could connect from that core, from that inner child that simply craves for human connection. So the story, yeah, thank you. And how I started Warmspace, I think the main inspiration came from Burning Man, not directly, but that is when I realized the value and the beauty of authentic human connection. Up until that point, which was 2 years ago in 2019, I didn't know how to be vulnerable or how to relate. Actually, let me go a step back. I didn't know how to have close friends. Like I always craved for having best friends, like the tight group of friends that I kind of always rely on. They'll always have my back, but I just never had that. And I, to the point where I kind of gave up yearning for that, longing for that type of connection. And I became quite a loner, and like that solo wolf that became overly independent, do solo traveling, and it got pretty toxic to the point where I put myself first in a lot of situations above others and the need of others. I found volunteering a liability. Like I just didn't. I got to the point where I really just prioritized myself because I think I was hurt by the times where I was disappointed by not getting the type of connection. And at Burning Man, that crave and longing for such deep intimacy and connection was, I met my need. I was reminded of that need, and the needs were met, because at that point, I stopped caring about what people think about me. I stopped trying to impress others, and none of that really matters. And I could see how people are so genuine and connecting with me and caring for me for just being me, for my human qualities, not because of all those external validations that I crave for. And I developed real connection and friendship, and with people that I just met like for the first time. And it just blew my mind, and how people were so compassionate, and they operate as a collective. And these were like things that were very foreign in my mind because I was so used to prioritizing me first. And that really shifted something in me and saying and at that point I got pretty jaded because like I accomplished a lot in life, but always asking what's more to life. Always felt there's this emptiness that I didn't know how to feel. And I realized that void was caused by the lack of connection.
I wonder, since you mentioned Burning Man as this trigger moment, what do you think facilitated this for your journey? Was it the fact that you found your crowd so that Burning Man attracts a certain kind of people? Or is it the space or creating something together? Or what made it possible?
What made it possible at Burning Man, or what made it possible for me to end up being at Burning Man?
For you to find this connectedness at Burning Man.
Yeah, I think it's just really the environment and just the collective magic that was co-created by everyone that carries this type of energy and this type of mindset and attitude and values to care for one another, to act as one instead of like a separate individual self. And I think from the very beginning, the moment I stepped into the playa and just seeing this lady near the entrance just welcoming us with open arms and say like welcome home, and just an instant like feeling of being so welcome and the warmth, and every day just meeting these people who look just so genuinely caring and friendly. Like I have no trust issue whatsoever that I could go to someone, and if I ask for help, that person will definitely be there for me. So it's that all these little things that I observed that influence my subconscious to believe that this is possible and this is what I've been missing in my life. It's just genuine human connection. And there were a lot of moments of like vulnerabilities when like I broke my bike or I got lost, and then my campmates were just there to help me and to hold me and to be there for me. And those were moments where I felt, wow, I am truly safe and cared for, and it's unconditional, the love that I received. That was what really shifted the core in me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And it almost sounds as if all these bits and pieces that you experienced there then translated into what later became Warmspace.
Yes. So it kind of kickstarted my facilitation journey, because I kept thinking, how can I engineer more of this type of connections? Because I lived in Singapore back then, and the environment wasn't Burning Man. Like things like this don't just happen organically. So I had to think of ways where I could intentionally create and facilitate opportunities for such connections to happen. And I was particularly interested in deepening my connection with my guy friends, realizing and unlearning the toxic masculinity at Burning Man. So what I did was invited a few of my male colleagues at work whom I think had a little bit of like that opening in their heart area. And I invited them over for dinner, and then I got this connection card games called the Empathy Box. So I cooked dinner for them, and then after dinner, I told them that, okay, we're gonna like try to open our heart up to each other, which was very bizarre for a lot of them, because we men just are not used to, for majority of the men are not used to talking about feelings and sharing about and be vulnerable in front of each other. And at the end of that facilitation or game, there was just this depth that we all felt that we rarely touch in our life, and feeling that support for one another, and just the feedback that they share with me. Wow, I've never done this with fellow men and all of that. And I just realized the power of facilitating deep human connections. And this is one example, and I kept looking for ways to use like different tools at my workplace in my personal life to create more of these moments of beautiful human connection. And then I realized, wow, there's really power in being able to facilitate, in being able to guide people through a process that makes them feel safe. I saw this particularly in my men's circle with a bunch of guys who are not used to sharing feelings. And because of the framework that we had, where you check in for 3 minutes, and during the 3 minutes, there's certain prompts that you can follow. So you don't throw people into the deep end, but you kind of guide them along the way to slowly open up. And so all these insights inspired me to start Warmspace.
And maybe we can take a moment to dig a little bit deeper there. So you said that there are different prompts for the 3 minutes check-in. So I guess you start with something that is fairly easy and maybe not too deep. Can you give some examples where would you start with a group of men who are not used to speak about their feelings and vulnerability.
Yeah, I remember our first meeting, there was like 15 of us. It was like 6 a.m. in the morning. And what we did was we did a little run around the park. And then we did HIIT, high intensity interval training. I think just to like warm ourselves up literally for the session. And then we gather in circle. And I think a little bit of drop in terms of tuning into our heart, which involves a bit of meditation and slowing down our breathing. That really helps us to intentionally get into that space of opening up and being vulnerable. And then some of the questions that we use for the prompts will include simple things like, what's your highlight for the week or the recent time? What challenges that you went through that you want to share with us? What are the things that you're looking forward to? And what kind of topics that you wanted to propose for the men to discuss and dive deeper.
Wonderful. And I wonder, where's the difference or the similarity when you move the environment of such deep discussions online versus offline, really? So what is the role of physical presence?
Honestly, for one-on-one, I haven't seen that much of a difference between online and offline. And I might argue you could sometimes go deeper online, even though you couldn't really feel the person's like presence, but just because of how we could modify the virtual environment that could help bring up certain emotions or a state of mind. Anyway, that's what we do at Warmspace. We include a little bit of music, we add a little bit of prompts, and there's a bit of guidance and virtual cards that appear to throw like deep questions to you. And some of these elements that we could use to optimize a virtual environment could help deepen the connection that you share with someone else. So that's one-on-one, but I feel in a group setting, it'll be much trickier because that is where the in-person dynamic is very important and it's still hard to replicate virtually, where you need to be aware of not just the person you're speaking to, but like the reaction of everyone in your surrounding and noticing all the little ways where people are receiving what you shared or paying attention to the kind of group sentiment and then shifting the topic or the energy of the conversation. So I think these are the things that are really important and beautiful to see and experience in person that is still hard to replicate for a group setup.
I can imagine, because if you're in a one-on-one conversation, it might be easier to regulate the flow and to prompt one or the other. It's easier to listen and to really focus on one person. If you're with 15, then how do you make sure that everyone really gets the time to speak and finds their voice and space?
Yeah, it gets tricky with a big group.
So to design this flow of a one-on-one conversation online, you mentioned that there's music and that there are prompts. Is there something like a magic formula to create deep human connection between strangers?
Well, I can speak of the magic formula that we have designed ourselves and we've seen has worked across hundreds of users through the beautiful feedback they've shared with us. And I think it involves a couple of things. Like one, as I mentioned, music. It's a simple add-on, but we've heard many times how the music helps people to feel more at ease, to drop in more into that space of silence and space of openness and be more relaxed in their nervous system. The second one is prompts, how a little bit of nudge could help people to see a part of themselves that they don't normally visit. And prompts also in a way of how you relate or respond or listen to the other person. So at the beginning of our Warmspace, we established a few ground principles, such as using I statements or to ensure that people keep their conversation confidential. This adds a little bit of element of safety for people to feel more open to share, knowing that they're safe. And to set an intention to be present for the person in front of you. Actually, this is a little trick that we use to help people stay present, which is to hide their self view. So you get to check in a little bit to see whether you have the right camera setting. But once the Warmspace begins, when you see the other person, your self view is hidden right away. So your focus entirely goes to the other person.
Awesome. Yeah, I can see that working. You're less self-aware then, and might be more open to actually share, because you don't constantly are confronted with your own self.
Exactly, because I see that in myself in every Zoom call. While someone's presenting, I'll like check myself like on the camera, like on how I look, or when I'm sharing something, and I'll be more self-aware of like how am I presenting myself. So when we take that all away, the focus can then be fully on the connection between the two of us.
I like that. And how did you choose the prompts that you would suggest to these pairs who haven't met yet until the moment they enter?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of an art. So I curated a list of questions that I feel could allow anyone to relate to and able to go deeper into themselves and uncover something about themselves. So I picked something that's a little bit universal that everyone can relate and resonate with. And for the prompts in terms of how to respond and share, a lot of them is kind of based on some authentic relating frameworks. So generally things that I know will work for most people, because currently we only have one like default experience, or it's a little bit more generic. In the future though, we do plan to dive into like certain topics, focusing on anger, focusing on how to deal with loss or LGBT struggle, and our prompts will then be modified and customized accordingly.
It almost sounds like guided peer therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
And could also, I imagine, be a wonderful training for individuals on how to have more meaningful conversations than maybe with their friends, because somehow I have the impression that it might be easier to go deep and to share these things with someone you just met online and you most probably won't meet again.
Yeah.
So to ask someone you don't really know all these questions might be easier, maybe also because we are more curious, because we don't have this overconfidence of, I know them already. They're my friends. They're my family. Don't need to ask these questions.
Yeah, totally. There's that degree of relief knowing that this person doesn't know anything about me, so I can start with a clean slate and present whatever feels most alive and feels most me right now to you, versus doing that with a friend, although there's a degree of depth that you can only access with certain history of friendship, but it comes with some prejudgment as well, of like the perception of who we were in the past as we were relating to them in different stages of our lives. So there's a bit of comfort and relief in sharing who you are in this current present moment with a stranger.
Yeah. I wonder how you guide the individuals, because let me put it differently. I think that having a meaningful conversation and to really be present and to share our full attention with someone is a skill that almost, or is kind of getting lost now with just this sensory overload and everything going so quick. How do you help the individuals to really be present and not fall into the, oh, let me tell you something mode or the coaching mode? So how do you stay in the facilitated conversation space without going into this coaching space that might feel weird because I don't want to be coached by just anyone?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess it's a combination of a couple of things. But firstly, we can't control whether or not the users will derail from our guidance. But I would say about 90% of our users, at least based on their feedback, they did have a very meaningful conversation throughout the experience. And I feel it's a combination of establishing that connection right away from the beginning. just like how we did it at our men's circle, we started a Warmspace with a mindfulness practice. So it's just tuning into our body, dropping into the present, and even having a brief moment of just looking into each other's eyes and feeling each other's presence without sharing any details about each other yet. It's just establishing this connection from the very beginning allows them to feel more present and centered and connected to the other person. And I feel the prompts at the beginning as well, that right away, like we skip the small talk. There's no questions around what's the weather like or how did you end up here. Like it goes straight into like what really matters and how deep in terms of who we are as a person and our life story, what have we learned. And I think, I forgot who shared this, but I think when you're sharing something that comes from the heart and it's vulnerable and people sense that, very difficult to not be present to that, because I think as human, we're just hardwired to notice, to empathize. So when we notice something that is truly authentic and it truly comes from that place of authenticity and vulnerability, we can't help but to be really hooked onto the conversation and the person sharing.
True.
So there's a lot of touch points of ensuring that people connect from that place allows them to be more present and stay in that flow of deep connection.
How long does it take to connect? From what you just shared, it sounds as if it's actually within a few minutes, or the first minutes that this correct. It's within these first minutes that the connection occurs.
Yeah, I would say about 10, 15 minutes. That's when they've gone through the meditation, they've listened to the principles, they have established a little bit of a connection with each other through noticing each other's presence. And that's when they got into the deeper question prompts.
Hey, since you are listening to this podcast, I was wondering whether you get enough opportunities to exchange, practice, and experiment with other facilitators. Have you heard of the Never Done Before Facilitation Festival? It's a 24-hour global event that is co-created by its participants and delivered by some of the most popular Workshops Work podcast guests. Visit neverdonebefore.org for more information. Use the code WORKSHOPSWORK to get a 20% discount. The festival starts as soon as you join. Now, back to the show.
According to you, what makes a workshop or a guided conversation fail?
I think a workshop or a guided conversation fails if the participants walk out of that experience feeling worse before they came in, or not feeling that they're more open or alive. And that can come from different reasons. One, like they don't feel like they're engaged in that workshop. They feel like they're not learning something new. They're not making new connections. They're not being entertained. So they're not getting any value out of the workshop. And I learned that the difference between a live webinar with a recorded webinar is the engagement and connections that people make in the live event. So people can always go back and watch on-demand content, but what they can't experience by themselves is the live participation. So I think a workshop or a guided experience needs to involve a lot of engagement that makes the participant feels alive.
Yeah. And I wonder what part is in the responsibility of the host or facilitator, and what's actually the responsibility of a participant. Because at the end of the day, we cannot influence someone's experience.
Yeah.
And still.
Yeah. I think, well, the participants in the ideal scenario where we attract the right audience and the participants are like a mindful, self-aware being, they should know how to regulate their own emotion and like speak their desires and like ask for what they want. But I think in most of the cases, people walk into a workshop leaving the control and steering wheel to the facilitator. So I think the facilitator has quite a responsibility to ensure that the whole flow of the event or the workshop to go well. And I think the facilitator also has that responsibility to really understand the audience well and at what level we need to engage them and what really pique their interest and create different touch points that could intrigue their interest and get their engagement. So I would say a big part of it is still on the facilitator.
Yeah. To come back to this sense a facilitator has for the room and can then directly steer into one direction or the other, this is totally taken away in an automated experience or a guided conversation that is basically automated. How do you get these touch points in to check whether it's going well? Or would you then just trust the two individuals that they are the rescue button?
That's a good idea that we don't have yet. But yeah, in an automated experience, you just have to trust that the process will guide and take the audience through, like they will have a good time. But at the end of that experience, so we still get feedback, it's just not a real-time feedback to adjust the experience. So we still tweak the experience very frequently based on the feedback that we collect at the end of the experience.
I wonder whether you could have something to click, okay, ready to go deeper, or this was maybe a little bit too deep.
Yeah, totally. That could definitely be the next evolution of Warmspace, to be more dynamic and intelligent in customizing the experience based on real-time feedback. Just like how we do it in real-time facilitation. We tweak the program and the flow of the event based on the sentiment of the group or the people we facilitate.
Yeah. Would you see something like this working also in a corporate space? I mean, you worked for big tech companies. How would it be to have something like Warmspace for colleagues, and what would you change?
We are actually in discussion with a company that provides authentic relating training to corporates, and we're looking at how we could convert some of their trainings into an automated facilitation, so that it's not something that they do one-off during the training, but it can be a skill that they practice on a weekly or regularly with their colleagues. The challenge, I think, is with a lot of traditional companies, relationship between and among colleagues are not necessarily very deep and personal. In fact, I think for a lot of the traditional industries, the relationship culture could be quite toxic, where I've heard stories of people in the banking or the legal companies to be sitting in the cubicle for the whole day and not even know who their colleagues, like who they are as a person. And there's a clear distinction between work and personal life at a lot of workplaces. But that's why we're excited to partner with these companies that provide the training, because they speak the language on how can we get buy-in from human resources and the management. So, because when we talk about, we're going to help deepen connection in your company and like build beautiful relationships, which are the things that don't translate directly to like business metrics, and unfortunately will often get ignored in a lot of workplaces. But we can help bridge that gap to help people see and realize the value of building deeper trust and connection in workplaces. And a lot of institutions like Harvard and Berkeley have done their research on how when there's a deeper bond in the company that results into higher productivity, retention rate, people become more loyal, and people trust the companies more. So there are some studies done around this, how we could communicate this to them. And also the way we facilitate will have to be quite different. Like we've tried this out with a startup before, and I think the feedback we got was it was quite uncomfortable to look into each other's eyes or to answer very deep personal questions like in what ways do you not receive love growing up? So some of these questions could be too personal for a work environment. So our partner is going to help us kind of customize the experience so that it's more work friendly, where we could still allow for rooms for deepening authentic relating, but in a way that is more accessible to them using the language and tools and elements that are more relatable in a workplace.
I can totally see that. And maybe you need more kind of degrees of freedom so that someone can choose how deep they want to go. And because I think in the workplace, there might also be topics that you maybe don't want to touch. So talking about friendship can seem very safe for some, but for someone who doesn't have friends, suddenly might be in a situation that with a colleague, you don't want to go there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or family. I was just thinking that it could even be helpful for team leaders to have kind of a guided conversation with their people, where very often we hear how frustrating the yearly review or feedback conversation can be, just because many managers either lack the preparation or lack the coaching skills or just don't know how to operate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could be a platform or a tool to facilitate the more difficult conversations that you see in teams, how to give critical feedback or how to manage conflict. And at Warmspace, we have a little bit of this ritual where every 2 weeks we have a team circle, and I will facilitate a format where everyone gets to share one appreciation for one another, but more importantly, to share all of our anxiety or feelings of insecurity, imposter syndrome, and all these things that we are feeling toward the company in a kind of safe, open platform where everyone gets to relate, share, and support one another. And I can totally see, we have benefited profoundly from that setup, just knowing that, I'm not feeling this alone, or just knowing, especially as like leaders or like the CEO of the company, like you carry a lot of this burden yourself, and just having that safe space to just really share that and have your team support you and see you, it was really good for me. And I'm sure that was really good for others who shared some things about what they're going through as well. So I could totally see this being applied to a lot of teams as well to deepen their trust. And for our new intern, for example, I did a Warmspace with her, and she was previously quite introverted, so she didn't speak up much and she didn't engage that much with me. But at the end of our Warmspace, I could completely see our relationship shifting and how she became more engaged in our team meeting, and she became more open in sharing her feedback with me. So I think even though you're building personal connection, it could definitely translate in your work relationship. When you have trust, you're more open to share feedback, to receive feedback, to engage with one another.
Absolutely. Also, because when you can relate on an emotional level with someone, I think your assumption shifts that you would think that their feedback, even if it's critical, comes from a good place.
Yes.
And I think when we feel emotionally connected, we are also more able to listen and to be present, because our brain is not busy looking out, is this person going to kill me?
Yeah.
Right? So the survival instincts are just lowered.
Yeah, absolutely. I can recall back at Google, we did a lot of like, what do you call it? Like not retreats, but like when global team like get together offsite. And because we were a global team, and I could see in myself how after I met a lot of these people in person, it completely changed my comfort level in reaching out to them, even though they're like from across the globe, because we already had that little connection that made me feel safe to ask questions, to ask for help, to collaborate, because there's already that bond and connection that was set as a base, as the foundation of our work relationship.
Yeah. And I can imagine that we talked in the beginning between the difference between online and offline. And I think the beauty of online is that we have permission or prompts to ask these questions, places where we wouldn't necessarily go offline, as you shared in the beginning. And I can imagine that it's such a nice excuse, especially with new team members or an offsite or the line manager to, the system just gave us this question, so let's answer it. And it's more awkward to say, no, I don't want to answer that. And it's not as awkward as, let me ask you a personal question.
Absolutely. That's what I realized too. And what part of what inspired me to start Warmspace is during COVID, when I was still with Google, where we couldn't meet our team in person, I was figuring out ways how I could still help foster connection. And if we cannot meet frequently, we cannot meet each other in terms of the frequency to build that connection. Can we meet less, but like go deep into depth? So I initiated like a kind of like an Oprah lunch session where I will get a teammate of mine and then really ask a lot of really meaningful personal questions and get them to share their life stories. And I had so many like moments where I'm like, wow, I can't believe this happened to you. I've been your colleague for like 3 years and I didn't know like this critical piece of information about you. And I realized without having this platform or a tool or that bridge or an excuse or permission to ask these questions, it is quite awkward to like, hey, tell me your life story, like, so having this space where you set that intention to want to connect deeper, this gives both people the permission to sharing and connect deeply with one another. So yeah, I think creating these spaces where intentional deep connection can flourish could be very valuable.
And I have one question. I recently recorded a conversation with Gustavo on psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And now I wonder, and I would be curious about your perspective, is in order to engage in these conversations, so for me to have the courage to schedule a warm space with a colleague, it seems as there needs to be a degree of psychological safety. On the other hand, it is through the conversation that psychological safety is created.
Yeah.
So for you, what does psychological safety mean? And how would you solve this paradox?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It is quite a chicken and egg. Yeah, psychological safety. Oh, by the way, Google did this research and found that is the number one factor that contributes to team effectiveness. It's not the expertise or the talents of the team, it's the psychological safety. And to me, that means being able to completely express myself authentically and to be received without judgment. And also the safety for me to share critical feedback or opinion that might be against what the team believes, and knowing that it's also appreciated, that I won't be judged for speaking about something that is against the stream, against the grain. And on how to solve that, I think back to our discussion on how the facilitator has the responsibility to create that experience that we want for the participants. So I think it's really our responsibility for anyone who go into a warm space to feel that psychological safety through all these little touch points and prompts that we created from the very beginning, from as small as like making people feel a little bit more calm through the music and making both people agree to keep the conversation confidential, from dropping in silence and just saying it and connecting without and dropping all type of judgment or assumptions for each other. So I think it is our job to create that psychological safety within the experience itself. Having said that, I think what you said was right. Then there needs to be a little bit of courage for people to want to schedule a Warmspace. So I think some sort of behavioral design needs to be implemented as well, which is your expertise, and we'll love to get your thoughts on this one day. And so we're thinking, how can we reduce the friction? Because having people to go to a new platform and schedule a time, even though it's just like a few clicks away, but that idea of like that going to something new and like learning something new is just a big mental barrier, even though it's a few clicks away. Mm-hmm. So that's how when we try to bring this to companies, our plan is to run like a live training first, get everyone online and introduce the platform, get them to practice a little bit of the authentic relating skills that we'll introduce on Warmspace during the call, and then send all of them to Warmspace at the end of that training. So we initiate them to the experience right away. And also maybe creating like intentional slots where this Warmspace connections could happen. So instead of asking them to do this, to schedule this manually, at least in the beginning, maybe we could set up 2 to 3 Warmspace slots in the week where people can just sign up and like get connected to their codes right away.
I like that because then it might feel less intimidating to basically schedule a date with a stranger, right?
Yeah. You're just participating instead of initiating.
Exactly. Whereas when you know that there are 3 times per week you can log in, then it's like joining a group conversation, but then you end up just with one person.
Yeah. Yeah, technically it doesn't make that much difference when you schedule or like when you join an event, but psychologically. It feels much less pressure and burden to join an event than like initiating an event.
And I think although the algorithm that matches you with someone is just the same, so at the end you will end up with one, but I think unconsciously it might feel as if you had more variety and choice to be matched when it's at a certain time. Otherwise, I might think, if I schedule whatever, a Warmspace for a Saturday evening, then lonely people who don't have friends will sign up there. So you become maybe more strategic.
Yeah, I think when you're given more options, you get overwhelmed, and like you have to check your calendar and see when you're free versus Saturday 12 p.m. Can you make it or not? It's just yes or no, and that completely removes that psychological friction for people to participate in something.
Yeah, reducing mental overload and then also making it easier to just arrive in the space and be present.
Yeah,
that's interesting. When you facilitate conversations, do you have and I would actually be curious in your experience with the Man Circle, do you have a favorite exercise that you like doing with them?
My favorite exercise, quite simple. I think a lot of people do this anyway, but I like to get people to share a couple of words to express how they're feeling. And sometimes it's not about knowing how they're feeling right now, but putting their voice into the space. Again, that once you're into something, that psychologically feels a little bit easier to go deeper rather than making that leap. Like getting someone to share a 3 minute of check-in could feel very intimidating. But like if you share a couple words in the beginning, you get used to that feeling of sharing with a group, and that ease the process of diving deeper into yourself and putting yourself into that group space.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Once we have used our vocal cords once, there's a higher likelihood that we'll use them again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I could pick another exercise, my absolute favorite, but this could only work with people who already know each other, is to share appreciation for one another. I like to put every person in the group in the spotlight, and then everyone will share what they appreciate about that person. It can go on for a while, but every time I do that, I walk away feeling just so warm and uplifted and so seen. And for a lot of people, that was their first time just receiving and not having to say that, that's not really me. Because we have that tendency to
Yeah.
invalidate our own greatness or our own qualities, and just being able to receive all this love that was being showered to you could be very profound for many people.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Also to learn to receive and to just say thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you would have wanted to share that we haven't touched upon yet in our conversation?
Not really. I feel complete.
Wonderful.
Touch on many different areas, and I felt we covered a lot.
Nice. And I enjoy closing with the same question. If someone fell asleep after minute 1 of our conversation and doesn't have time to listen to the entire show again, what would you like them to walk away with?
I would like them to walk away with the idea that one simple, but profound, deep conversation could potentially shape the trajectory of that person's lives. Because I just heard so much feedback around how that one interaction that they had on Warmspace, or the group that I facilitated, and that just that one day where they felt so seen and just so connected. It reminds them of what really matters. It reminds them that they're not alone. It reminds them that we're all in this together. And sometimes that's just the little support and boost that we need to get through the day tomorrow. So I think I want people to treasure every interaction, no matter how small that they have, whether it's one-on-one or a group, knowing that your presence could potentially change and save someone's lives. And we could create this big ripple effect of kindness and compassion just by being truly present with the person that we are conversing with.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that gift and for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is beautiful.
Yeah. I will put the links in the show notes so that everyone can connect to you and hop over to Warmspace to experience it themselves. And I'm looking forward to experience it.
Yeah. Can't wait to hear your feedback and your experience, and spreading more love and kindness through each conversation that we have. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.